I'd always thought my life with Clara was something solid, unbreakable, like a house built on stone, not sand. We'd been together 12 years, married for 9, and I'd spent every one of those years pouring myself into her happiness. The little things, you know? Waking up early to brew her coffee just the way she liked it, dark and bitter with a swirl of cream. Driving her to work when her car broke down, even if it meant I'd be late for my own shift at the warehouse. I wasn't perfect. God knows I had my flaws, but I was steady, reliable, the kind of man who'd rather fix a problem than complain about it. Clara always said she loved that about me. "You're my rock, Ethan," she'd whisper, her hazel eyes catching the light just so. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? It was late August when the first sea-ack appeared. I'd come home from a double shift, my back aching from hauling crates, my hands rough and calloused. The house was quiet, too quiet. Usually, Clara would be in the kitchen, humming some old tune while she chopped vegetables for dinner. She wasn't a chef, but she loved cooking for us. That night, though, the stove was cold. No note, no text. Her car was in the driveway, but she wasn't home. I called her phone straight to voicemail. I told myself she'd gone for a walk, maybe lost track of time. She did that sometimes, especially when the weather turned crisp and the leaves started to fall. Hours passed. By midnight, worry gnawed at me like a dog with a bone. I paced the living room, staring at the framed photo of us from our honeymoon in Maine, her laughing, wind tugging at her hair, me grinning like an idiot. Where was she? At 2 a.m., headlights swept across the window. I rushed to the door, relief flooding me, until I saw her step out of a car I didn't recognize. A sleek black sedan, the kind I'd never afford on my salary. She waved at the driver, a quick, casual gesture, then hurried up the steps. "Sorry I'm late," she said, breezing past me. Lost track of time with a friend. Her hair was mussed, her lipstick smudged. I asked who the friend was. "Just someone from work," she mumbled, avoiding my eyes. That was the first lie I caught. The next morning, she acted like anything happened. Coffee, toast, a kiss on my cheek before she left for her office job downtown. But something was off. Her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. I started noticing things. Her phone buzzing more than usual, her stepping out to take calls in the backyard, her coming home later and later. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband snooping through her stuff. But doubt is a weed. It grows if you don't yank it out. One night, while she showered, I grabbed her phone. No password, she'd always trusted me. The messages were right there, glowing in the dark. "Can't wait to see you again," from someone named Jay. My stomach twisted. Who the hell was Jay? I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed proof, something concrete to hold up and say, "Explain this." So I watched. I waited, and I hated myself for it. Every time she laughed at one of my dumb jokes, I wondered if she was faking it. Every time she touched my arm, I wondered if her hands had been somewhere else. The warehouse became my escape. Lifting crates, stacking boxes, letting the sweat drown out the questions. But at home, the silence between us grew louder. Clara didn't notice, or maybe she didn't care. Either way, I was starting to see her for what she might be. A stranger wearing my wife's face. The days blurred into weeks, and I became a ghost in my own life. Work, home, sleep, if you could call it that. Most nights, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Clara breathed softly beside me, oblivious to the storm building in my chest. Her phone stayed glued to her side now, like she knew I'd seen something. She'd changed the password too. I tried once, late at night, and got locked out after 3 wrong guesses. That stung more than I expected. It wasn't just the secrecy. It was the effort she put into hiding. Whoever Jay was, they mattered more than me. I started digging. Not proud of it, but a man can only take so much wondering before he breaks or acts. First, I checked her work schedule. She told me she had late meetings, overtime at the office. I called her boss, pretending to be a delivery guy confirming her hours. "Clara? She's been leaving at 5 sharp for months," he said, confused. So the late nights weren't work. I drove by her office one evening, parked across the street like some low-budget detective. At 5:03, she walked out, climbed into that same black sedan. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The car pulled away and I followed. It led me downtown to a part of T-City I rarely went. Fancy bars, overpriced restaurants, people in suits who looked down on guys like me. The sedan stopped outside a sleek hotel, all glass and chrome. Clara stepped out, smoothing her dress. A red one I didn't recognize. Then he got out. Tall, broad-shouldered, hair slicked back like he'd stepped out of a magazine. I assumed. They walked inside together, her arm brushing his, a smile on her face I hadn't seen in years. I didn't follow them in. Couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. I just sat there, engine idling, watching the hotel doors swallow them whole. When I got home, I poured myself a whiskey, something I hadn't done since my dad's funeral. The burn didn't help. I kept seeing her with him, imagining what they were doing behind those polished walls. Was it just a fling? Something more? Did she laugh with him the way she used to with me? The questions piled up, heavy as the crates I hauled every day. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I started planning. Not revenge, not yet, but answers. I needed to know how deep this went, how long she'd been playing me for a fool. The next day, I called in sick and rented a car. My truck was too recognizable, and I didn't want her spotting me. I tailed her again, this time to a park on the edge of town. She met him there, under an oak tree, the leaves turning gold with the season. They sat on a bench, close but not touching, talking for hours. I watched from a distance, hidden behind tinted windows. He handed her something. A small box, maybe jewelry. She opened it, beamed, and hugged him. My chest tightened. That wasn't a casual gift. That was intention. I drove home shaking, the pieces clicking into place. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. Clara was building a whole other life, and I wasn't in it. I stopped asking her where she'd been. What was the point? She'd lie, and I'd pretend to believe her, and we'd both go on acting like our marriage wasn't a hollowed-out shell. Instead, I threw myself into the hunt. I needed evidence, not just for me, but for whatever came next. I bought a cheap camera, the kind with a decent zoom, and started documenting. Pictures of her leaving work, meeting him at the hotel, the park, a coffee shop downtown. I kept a notebook too, dates, times, locations. Felt obsessive, maybe unhinged, but it kept me sane. Every photo, every scribbled note, was a brick in the wall I was building between who I'd been and who I was becoming. Clara didn't notice the change in me. She was too wrapped up in her own world. She'd come home humming, her eyes bright, her step lighter than it had been in years. Once, she even cooked dinner, lasagna, my favorite, and chattered about some work project like everything was normal. I nodded, ate, smiled. Inside, I was screaming. How could she sit there, across from me, wearing that ring I'd saved 6 months to buy, and act like she hadn't gutted us? I wanted to grab her shoulders, shake her, demand the truth. But I didn't. I played the part, dumb, loyal Ethan, because I wasn't ready to show my hand. Then I got a name. Jeremy. Jeremy Halstead. I'd overheard her on the phone one night, whispering his name in the bathroom while she thought I was asleep. Jeremy, I'll be there soon, she'd said, her voice soft, eager. I Googled him the next morning. Found his LinkedIn, some hotshot lawyer, partner at a firm downtown, mid-40s, divorced, no kids. His photo stared back at me. Smug, polished, the kind of guy who'd never lifted anything heavier than a briefcase. I dug deeper. Social media, public records, anything I could find. He lived in a condo by the river, drove a BMW, probably the sedan I'd seen. Made sense. Clara always had a thing for nice stuff, even if she'd settled for me. The more I learned, the worse it got. I found an old receipt in her purse. Dinner for two at a place we'd never been, $200 tab. She'd paid with her card, the one tied to our joint account. My money funding her betrayal. That lit a fire in me, something dark and slow-burning. I started tracking his movements too. Took photos of him leaving his office, meeting her, laughing over drinks. I built a file, dates, receipts, pictures, locked in a box under the spare tire in my truck. It wasn't enough to just know. I needed leverage, something to hit back with when the time came. One night, she came home late again, reeking of his cologne. Sharp, expensive, not the cheap stuff I wore. She crawled into bed, kissed my cheek, mumbled something about being tired. I lay there, rigid, her scent mixing with his, and I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. The pretending, the watching, it was eating me alive. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was angry, furious. Not at her, not at him, but at myself for letting it happen. For being the guy who didn't see it coming. That night, I made a decision. This wasn't going to end quietly. Clara wanted a new life? Fine. But I'd make sure she paid for it. And not just with tears. The warehouse became my refuge. The one place where I could shut off the noise in my head. I'd stack boxes, haul pallets, lose myself in the rhythm of it. My coworkers noticed I'd gotten quieter. But they didn't pry. Good thing, too, I wasn't in the mood to talk. Every lift, every grunt, fueled the plan taking shape. Revenge wasn't a word I threw around lightly, but it fit. Clara had taken everything. Our home, our trust, our years, and handed them to Jeremy like they were hers to give. I wasn't going to let that stand. But I needed something bigger than confrontation. Something that'd hit her where it hurt. I started with money. Finances were always her weak spot. She loved spending, hated saving. We'd fought about it early on, her blowing cash on shoes or dinners out while I scraped by to cover rent. Our joint account was still active, though, and I had access. I checked the statements. Hundreds of dollars funneled into her secret life. Hotels, restaurants, a spa day 2 weeks back. My jaw clenched as I scrolled through it all. She'd been living like a queen while I ate leftovers and patched my work boots with duct tape. So I drained it. Not all at once, that'd tip her off, but slow, steady transfers to a new account she didn't know about. By the end of the month, I'd moved $8,000. Let her figure out how to pay her next bill. Next, I went after her things. She loved her wardrobe, dresses, jewelry, that red number she'd worn for him. One afternoon, while she was at work, I packed it all up. Every silk blouse, every pair of heels, every necklace I'd ever bought her. I didn't trash it, not yet. I stashed it in a storage unit across town, paid cash, used a fake name. She'd notice eventually, but by then, it'd be too late. I left just enough in the closet to keep her from suspecting right away. A few old sweaters, a pair of jeans. The rest? Gone. I pictured her confusion, her panic, and it felt good. Small but good. Then there was Jeremy. He wasn't just a fling. He was the prize she'd traded me for. I couldn't touch him directly, not without risking jail, but I could unravel him. His LinkedIn bragged about his law firm, his big cases, his perfect life. I started digging into his past. Divorced, yeah, but why? Public records showed a messy split, alimony disputes, accusations of infidelity. Sounded familiar. I tracked down his ex-wife's number through an old court filing. Took me 3 days to work up the nerve to call. When I did, she picked up, voice sharp but curious. "Who's this?" I told her enough. My name, my situation, nothing too specific. She laughed. Bitter. Sounds like Jeremy's type. "What do you want from me?" I asked if she had anything on him, anything dirty. She paused, then said, "Give me a week." Clara came home that night, oblivious as ever. She chattered about a coworker's promotion, her hair still carrying his scent. I nodded, poured her wine, played the part. But inside I was counting down. The money was moving, her clothes were gone, and Jeremy's ex was in play. It wasn't enough, not nearly, but it was a start. I wanted her to feel what I'd felt. The slow, sickening realization that everything you thought you had was slipping away. I wanted her to wake up one day and find her world in pieces, with no idea how it happened. And I wanted Jeremy to choke on it too. This wasn't about breaking them up. This was about breaking them down. The call from Jeremy's ex came on a Tuesday. Her name was Rachel, and her voice crackled with a mix of exhaustion and spite. "You want dirt? I've got plenty," she said. She'd spent years married to him, watching him charm his way through women and clients alike. He wasn't just a cheater, he was reckless. Tax evasion, shady deals with clients, a gambling habit that had nearly bankrupted them. She kept records, screenshots, emails. stuff she'd held onto in case he ever came after her again. "He's careful now, but not careful enough," she told me. "You want to bury him? Use this." She emailed me a zip file, password protected. I opened it that night. Bank statements, photos of him with other women during their marriage, even a recorded call where he bragged about skimming fees. Jackpot. I didn't stop there. I cross-checked dates from my own photos, Clara meeting him with Rachel's records. One night, when Clara had told me she was at a team-building event, she'd been at a casino with Jeremy. There was a blurry shot of them at a blackjack table, her leaning into him, his arm around her waist. My hands shook as I stared at it. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a whole damn performance. I printed it, added it to my file. The plan was growing teeth now, sharp, jagged ones. I'd hit Jeremy first, then let Clara feel the fallout. Back home, the cracks were showing. Clara noticed her missing clothes a week after I'd taken them. "Ethan, have you seen my blue dress?" she asked one morning, rifling through the closet. I shrugged, kept my face blank. "Maybe you left it somewhere." She frowned, muttered something about dry cleaning, and let it go. But I saw the unease in her eyes. Good. The money was next. She tried to buy groceries one evening, and her card got declined. "That's weird," she said, laughing it off as she pulled out cash. I sipped my coffee, silent. She hadn't checked the account yet, but she would. And when she did, she'd find $12 left, enough for a candy bar, maybe. Jeremy's firm was my real target. I anonymized Rachel's files, scrubbed names, dates, anything traceable, and mailed copies to his partners. No note, just the evidence. His gambling debts, the dodgy transfers, the women. Let them connect the dots. I sent another set to the State Bar Association, same deal. If they investigated, his career was toast. I pictured him sweating in his corner office, that smug grin wiped clean off. It wouldn't happen overnight, wheels like that turn slow. But it was coming. And when it hit, Clara would see her shiny new life crumble. She came home late again, all smiles, oblivious to the noose tightening. "Long day," she sighed, kicking off her shoes. I nodded, handed her a glass of water. "You look happy," I said, testing her. She froze, just for a second, then laughed. "Just glad to be home, liar." I smiled back, but my mind was elsewhere. On the storage unit, the drained account, the letters in the mail. She thought she'd built something with him, something better than us. I'd let her enjoy it a little longer. Then I'd pull the rug out so hard she'd never get up. Revenge wasn't loud. Not yet. It was patient, quiet, and cold as hell. The warehouse felt heavier those days, like the air itself was pressing down on me. I'd stack crates higher than I should have, daring them to fall, daring something to break. It was the only place I could breathe, where the rage didn't choke me. At home, Clara floated through her routine, oblivious to the web I'd spun. She hadn't checked the bank account yet. Not really. She'd grumbled about the declined card once more, but I'd shrugged it off, said maybe the bank glitched. She bought it. She always bought it. That was her mistake, thinking I was still the same trusting fool she'd married. Rachel's files were burning a hole in my mind. I'd sent the first wave to Jeremy's firm and the bar, but I hadn't stopped there. I dug into his condo. Public records showed a second mortgage, one he'd taken out a year ago. Guy was drowning in debt, probably feeding that gambling habit. I wondered if Clara knew, if she'd seen the cracks in her golden boy. Probably not. She was too busy basking in whatever he promised her. Fancy dinners, a life I couldn't give. I mailed an anonymous tip to his bank, hinting at fraud. Let them audit him, dig up the mess. I wanted him scrambling, sweating, losing sleep the way I had. Clara's wardrobe was still mostly gone, and she'd started to notice more. "Ethan, my earrings, the gold ones, where are they?" she asked one evening, her voice sharp. I was washing dishes, hands deep in soapy water, and I didn't turn around. "Dunno, maybe you misplaced them." She huffed, stormed off to search. I smirked into the sink. The earrings were in that storage unit, along with her dresses, her scarves, her life. She'd find empty drawers soon, and I'd watch her squirm. It was petty, sure, but it felt like reclaiming something, pieces of her she didn't deserve anymore. I upped the ante with Jeremy. Found his car parked outside the hotel one night. Same black sedan, waxed to a shine. I didn't touch it, didn't smash the windows like I wanted to. Instead, I slipped a tracker under the wheel well, cheap thing I'd bought online. Watched it ping his movements on my phone. Office, casino, hotel, her office. Clockwork. I started calling in tips. Anonymous, of course. Noise complaints to his condo board, parking violations to the city. Small stuff, annoying stuff. I wanted him irritated, distracted, unraveling one thread at a time. Clara would feel it too, even if she didn't know why. She came home that night, flustered. Work was a nightmare, she said, tossing her bag on the counter. I poured her wine, kept my voice even. Rough day. She nodded, sipping fast. Jeremy's been so stressed. Some client thing. I bit back a laugh. Stressed. Huh? Good. Let him drown in it. I watched her sip, her fingers tapping the glass, and wondered how long she'd keep pretending. How long before she saw the walls closing in. I didn't ask about him. Didn't need to. She'd handed me his name like a gift, and I was using it to carve them both up. Slow, steady, surgical. The tracker paid off faster than I'd hoped. Jeremy's car pinged at a bar downtown one night. A dive. Not his usual scene. I drove there, parked a block away, watched him stumble out with some guy I didn't recognize. They argued, loud, sloppy. Jeremy shoved the guy who shoved back harder. I snapped photos, grainy, but clear enough. Drunk, fighting, looking like a mess. Perfect. I sent them to Rachel, asked if she knew the other man. Old gambling buddy, she texted back. Owes Jeremy money. I smiled. Another crack in his polished facade. I mailed the pics to his firm, no note. Let them wonder. Clara started slipping too. She forgot things, dinner plans, a load of laundry, my birthday. That one hit hard. 9 years. And she didn't even blink when the day passed. I'd spent it alone at the warehouse, lifting until my arms gave out, then drank whiskey in the truck. She came home late. No apology. Just a yawn and a busy day. I nodded, said nothing. But I took her car keys that night, drove to a chop shop across town. Guy there owed me a favor from years back. Make it disappear, I told him, handing over her sedan. He grinned, didn't ask why. Next morning, she freaked, pacing the driveway, calling the cops about a stolen car. I played dumb, offered to drive her to work. She didn't suspect me. Not yet. The money was almost gone now. $15,000 siphoned to my secret account. She finally checked the joint one, saw the balance, and lost it. Ethan, what the hell happened to our savings? She yelled, waving her phone. I leaned against the counter, calm as stone. Dunno. Maybe you spent it. Her face went red, then pale. I didn't. This is insane. She called the bank, stammered through questions. I listened, sipping coffee, while they told her about unusual activity. She hung up, stared at me. You believe me, right? I shrugged. Sure. She didn't push it, but I saw the doubt in her eyes. Doubt about me, for once. Jeremy's firm called him in. I knew because Clara mentioned it offhand, worried. He's got some meeting tomorrow, sounded serious. I nodded, hid my grin. The letters had landed. I pictured him in a suit, sweating through excuses, his partners glaring. Good. Let him twist. I mailed more that night. Casino photos to his ex-clients, old emails to a local reporter who loved a scandal. I wasn't done with him, not by a long shot. He'd built his life on lies, and I'd make sure it collapsed. Brick by brick, with Clara watching. She slept beside me that night, restless, muttering in her dreams. I lay awake, staring at her, wondering how I'd ever loved her so much. The woman I'd married was gone, replaced by this stranger who thought she could trade me in like an old car. I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt cold, focused, alive. The plan was working piece by piece, and I was just getting started. She'd wake up soon, to no car, no money, no lover, and I'd be there, smiling, while her world burned. Clara's car being stolen threw her off more than I'd expected. She paced the house for days, calling insurance, ranting about thieves in the neighborhood. I drove her to work, silent, while she fidgeted beside me. "This is a nightmare," she said once, gripping her phone. "Everything's falling apart." I glanced at her, kept my voice flat. "Yeah, tough luck." She didn't catch the edge in my tone. She was too busy texting Jeremy, probably whining about her bad week. I dropped her off, watched her hurry inside, then checked the tracker. His car was at the firm. I bet he was in that meeting right now, choking on my anonymous gifts. Rachel called again. "He's freaking out," she said, glee in her voice. "My friend at the firm says they're auditing him. Partners are pissed." I thanked her, hung up, and leaned back in my truck. The warehouse could wait. I needed to see this. I drove downtown, parked near his office, watched suits come and go. Jeremy stormed out at noon, tie loose, face red. He kicked his car's tire, yelled into his phone. I snapped a photo, sent it to the reporter, captioned, "Local lawyer losing it? Petty maybe, but every jab counted." I wanted him unhinged, sloppy, vulnerable. Clara came home quiet that night, no humming, no chatter. She cooked pasta, burned it, cursed under her breath. "You okay?" I asked, testing. She nodded, too fast. "Just tired." I didn't push. I knew why. She'd seen him today, probably heard about his stress. I wondered if he'd told her the truth, or if he was still playing the big shot. Either way, she was rattled. Good. I cleared the table, watched her pick at her food. "You're not eating," I said. She shrugged. "Not hungry." I let it drop, but I saw it. The strain in her eyes, the weight settling in. My moves were hitting them both, slow and steady. The storage unit was my next play. I went there late, under cover of dark, and sorted through her stuff. Found a necklace he'd given her, silver, heart-shaped, cheap for a guy like him. I melted it down with a torch I'd borrowed from work. Turned it into a lump of nothing. Felt right. The dresses, though, I had plans for those. I drove to a shelter downtown, donated them all. Signed the receipt, Clara Davis. Her maiden name. She'd never know, not until it was too late. I kept one thing, her wedding veil, yellowed from years, in a box. That was for later. She woke up the next morning, groggy, complaining about a headache. "I need a break," she mumbled, rubbing her temples. I handed her coffee, kept my face blank. "Take a day off." She shook her head. "Can't. Jeremy needs me." My jaw tightened, but I nodded. "Needs her." Huh? He'd need a lawyer soon, not a mistress. I drove her to work again, watched her disappear inside. The tracker pinged, his car at the casino. Midday. Desperate, probably, chasing a win to fix his mess. I smiled. Keep digging, Jeremy. I'd make sure there was no way out. The reporter bit. Front page of the local paper 2 days later. Top lawyer faces fraud allegations. Jeremy's photo stared out, polished but strained, next to blurry shots of him at the casino, arguing in the street. No hard proof yet, just rumors, questions, enough to make his firm squirm. Clara saw it too. She left the paper on the counter, open to the story, when she went to shower. I read it, sipped my coffee, waited. She came out, hair wet, eyes darting. "Did you see this?" she asked, voice tight. I nodded. "Rough week for your friend." She flinched barely, but I caught it. "He's not, he's just a coworker." I smiled, let it hang. She didn't push back. Her phone buzzed nonstop that day. She stepped outside to take calls, whispering, pacing the yard. I watched through the window, saw her hands shake. Jeremy, no doubt, spiraling, dragging her down with him. I checked the tracker. He'd gone from casino to bar to his condo, erratic, sloppy. I mailed more to the reporter. Rachel's bank records, scrubbed clean, showing his gambling debts. Hinted at a mistress too, no name, just enough to make people dig. Clara would hate that, her dirty secret splashed in ink. I wanted her to feel exposed, cornered, the way I had. She didn't cook that night. Ordered takeout instead. Paid with cash since the account was dry. "Bank's still figuring it out," she muttered, avoiding my eyes. I nodded, ate my noodles, watched her pick at hers. "You seem off," I said, casual. She shrugged. Just stressed. I leaned back, let the silence stretch. She cracked first. Jeremy's in trouble. Big trouble. I raised an eyebrow. What kind? She hesitated, then sighed. Work stuff. Lies. I don't know. Lies. Huh? Ironic. I didn't press, just filed it away, another brick for the pile. The shelter called me that afternoon, thinking I was her. Thanks for the donation, Ms. Davis, the woman said. Those clothes helped a lot of folks. I played along, deepened my voice. Glad to hear it. Hung up, grinned. Clara's precious wardrobe warming strangers. She'd lose her mind if she knew. I checked the storage unit again, grabbed her veil. Took it to a guy I knew, a tailor, asked him to shred it into strips. Weird request, he said, but he did it. I kept the pieces in a bag, locked in my truck. Symbolism, maybe, but it felt right, tearing up what she'd thrown away. She came home late again, eyes red, makeup smudged. Rough day, I asked, handing her water. She nodded, took it with trembling hands. Jeremy's a mess. Everything's falling apart. I sat across from her, watched her unravel. Sounds tough, I said, voice flat. She looked at me, really looked, for the first time in weeks. You don't care, do you? I shrugged. Not my problem. She blinked, set the glass down. Hard. What's wrong with you lately? I smiled, slow and cold. Nothing's wrong with me, Clara. She stared, then turned away. She knew something was off. She just didn't know how deep it went. Jeremy's car stopped moving that night, parked at his condo, dead still. I checked the tracker at 3 a.m., couldn't sleep anyway. Wondered if he'd crashed, burned out from the pressure. I drove by at dawn, saw it there. Tires slashed. Someone else's handiwork. Maybe that gambling buddy, maybe a pissed-off client. Didn't matter. Fit my plan. I snapped a photo, sent it to the reporter. Trouble follows Halstead. The story was growing legs now, online comments piling up, calling him a crook, a sleaze. I pictured him reading them, sweating through his silk shirts. Perfect. Clara barely spoke the next day. She left early, no goodbye, no coffee. I followed her, first time in a while. She met him at a diner, not their usual spots. He looked rough, unshaven, bags under his eyes. She hugged him, quick, desperate. I watched from across the street, camera ready. Click, her holding his hand. Click, him rubbing his face, defeated. Click, her crying, head in her hands. I didn't feel sorry for them. I felt nothing. Just kept shooting, building the file. She'd see these one day when it hurt most. The bank called her that afternoon. I heard her yelling through the bedroom door. Fraud? How? I didn't authorize that. She stormed out, pale, shaking. Someone's stealing from us? She said, glaring at me like I'd fix it. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. That's rough. What did they say? She rambled, transfers, new account, no trace. It's everything, Ethan. Years of savings. I nodded, slow. Guess we're broke then. Her eyes widened. You don't even care? I shrugged. Not much I can do. She threw her phone down, stormed off. I smiled. She still didn't suspect me. Jeremy's firm suspended him. I saw it online. A press release buried in legal jargon. Pending investigation, it said. I mailed the diner photos to his partners. Added a note. He's not just a thief. Let them chew on that. Clara came home late, sobbing, locked herself in the bathroom. I knocked once. You okay? No answer, just water running. I left her there, went to the truck, checked my stash. The veil strips, the file, the cash, all safe. I was close now, so close I could taste it. Her tears were just the start. She emerged an hour later, face puffy, voice small. Jeremy's done. They fired him. I sat on the couch, beer in hand. That's a shame. She glared. You don't get it. He's ruined. And She stopped, bit her lip. I tilted my head. You what? She shook her head, turned away. I let her go. She didn't need to say it. I knew. She tied herself to him, bet on him, and now he was sinking. I'd make sure she went down too, clinging to his wreckage. The end was coming, and I'd be the one standing when it hit. Clara barely left the house the next day. She called in sick, stayed in bed, curtains drawn. I heard her crying through the door, soft, broken sobs that might have moved me once. Not now. I made coffee, loud enough to let her know I was there, but didn't knock. Let her stew in it. The paper ran another story. Halstead's fall. From law to ruin. Jeremy's face was everywhere, online, in print, a punching bag for every commenter with a grudge. I skimmed it at the kitchen table, sipping slow. His firm had cut him loose, clients were suing, the bar was investigating. My letters had worked. He was a dead man walking, and Clara was tied to him. She came out at noon, hair a mess, eyes swollen. "I need to borrow your truck," she said, voice flat. I leaned back, crossed my arms. "Where you going?" She hesitated. "To see Jeremy. He needs me." I stared, let the silence stretch. "Take the bus," I said finally. Her mouth dropped open. "Ethan, come on." I cut her off. "Truck's mine. Figure it out." She glared, grabbed her purse, stormed out. I watched her march down the street, shoulders hunched. She'd walk a mile to the stop, good. Small victories stacked up. I checked the tracker while she was gone. His car hadn't moved, still at the condo, tires flat. I drove by, saw him through the window, pacing, phone to his ear, blinds half open. He looked like a caged animal, all that swagger gone. I parked a block away, pulled out the diner photos, printed them big, 8x10s, her face clear as day. Wrote on the back, "She's why you're broke." Slipped them under his door, quiet as a shadow. Let him chew on that, his perfect mistress costing him everything. I wanted him paranoid, turning on her like she'd turned on me. Clara came home late, soaked from rain, no umbrella. She didn't speak, just went straight to the shower. I waited, flipping through channels, volume low. She emerged in a towel, sat on the couch, stared at the floor. "He's leaving," she whispered. I muted the TV. "Who?" She swallowed. "Jeremy. He's moving out of state, maybe out of the country. Says it's too much." I nodded, kept my face blank. "Smart move." She looked at me, eyes searching. "You don't care at all, do you?" I shrugged. "Why should I?" She flinched, turned away. I saw it then, the crack in her armor. She was losing him, and she knew I wasn't her safety net anymore. I slept in the guest room that night, locked the door. Didn't trust her. Not with my keys, not with anything. Woke up to her banging on it, yelling about the bank again. "They froze the account, Ethan. Said it's fraud." I opened the door, leaned against the frame. "That's rough." She shoved past me, grabbed her phone, dialed furiously. I listened, half smirking, as she argued with some clerk. "No, I didn't move it. Someone stole it." She hung up, threw the phone down, glared at me. "You're useless," she snapped. I smiled, slow and cold. "Maybe." She didn't know half of it yet. The shelter sent a thank you note, addressed to Clara Davis. Slipped into our mailbox by mistake. I opened it, read the list. Dresses, shoes, jewelry, all donated in her name. "Your generosity saved lives," it said. I laughed, loud and bitter, tucked it away. She'd see it soon. Let her wonder how her precious things ended up clothing strangers. I pictured her face, that mix of shock and rage, and it fueled me. The warehouse was slow that day, so I took off early, drove to the storage unit. Grabbed the bag of veil strips, the last piece of her I'd kept. Time to use it. Clara was at the kitchen table when I got back, papers spread out, bank statements, insurance forms, her car claim. She didn't look up. "I'm figuring this out," she muttered. "Good luck," I said, dropping my keys on the counter. She glared. "You could help." I shrugged. "Not my mess." She slammed a pen down, stood. "What's your problem, Ethan? You've been like this for weeks." I stepped closer, voice low. "Maybe I'm just done." She froze, eyes wide. "Done with what?" I smiled, didn't answer, walked away. Let her guess. That night, I sewed the veil strips into a noose, Rough, uneven, but clear enough. Hung it from the bedroom ceiling fan, left the light on. She'd see it when she went to bed. I slept in the truck, parked a street over, waited. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed, her name on the screen. I didn't answer. 10 missed calls. Then a text. What is this? Are you insane? I grinned, turned it off. She'd found it. Good. Let her sit with it, let it sink in. I wasn't bluffing anymore. She'd feel the weight of what she'd done. Jeremy's condo was empty the next morning. Tracker still pinging, but no car, no lights. I drove by, saw a for sale sign slapped up overnight. He'd bolted. I checked online. Rumors said he'd skipped town, maybe Canada, dodging lawsuits and shame. Clara didn't know yet. She'd find out soon enough, and I'd make sure it hurt. I mailed the shelter note to her office. Let her coworkers see her charity. Added a photo, the diner shot, her crying over him. Captioned it. She gave it all away. Let her explain that to the gossip mill. She came home wild-eyed, clutching the note and photo. Ethan, what the hell is this? I sat on the couch, beer in hand. Looks like you've been busy. She threw them at me, shaking. You did this? My clothes, the money, everything? I sipped, met her gaze. You started it, Clara. She screamed, lunged at me. I caught her wrists held firm. You picked him, I said, voice ice. Now live with it. She yanked free, sobbing, ran to the bedroom. I heard the fan creak, the noose still there. She'd sleep under it tonight, alone. Clara didn't leave the bedroom for 2 days. I heard her pacing, muttering, crying through the walls. I didn't check on her. Didn't care to. The house felt like a battlefield. Every room a mine waiting to blow. I cooked for myself, left her nothing. She'd figure out how to eat with no money, no car, no lover to lean on. The shelter stunt hit her office. I got a call from her coworker, Lisa, asking if Clara was okay. Saw the donation thing. She's not answering, Lisa said. I played dumb. She's been off lately. Maybe check on her. Hung up, smiled. Let them swarm her with pity she didn't deserve. The bank sent a letter. Joint account officially closed. Fraud investigation pending. I'd covered my tracks. New account was offshore, untraceable, cash funneled through a friend who owed me. Clara found the letter, left it crumpled on the counter. She came out that night, pale, hair tangled. You took it all, she whispered, staring at me. I leaned against the fridge, shrugged. You spent it first, hotels, dinners, him. Her eyes widened. You knew. I nodded, slow. Everything. She sank into a chair, hands shaking. Why didn't you say? I laughed, sharp. Why didn't you? She had no answer, just tears. I mailed Jeremy's ex the last of it. Photos, records, a note. He's gone. You won. Rachel texted back. Thanks. Hope you're okay. I wasn't, but I didn't care. She'd get her alimony now, he couldn't hide forever. Clara's phone buzzed, work probably, or Lisa. She ignored it, stared at the noose still hanging. Take it down, she said, voice small. Do it yourself, I shot back. She didn't move. I grabbed my keys, left her there. Drove to the warehouse, worked a double shift. Needed the noise, the sweat, anything but her broken face. She was gone when I got back. Bag packed. No note. I checked the bedroom, noose still up, bed unmade. She'd taken the bus, maybe to her sister's, maybe nowhere. Didn't matter. I called the landlord, gave notice. Sold her wedding ring online, cheap, to some guy in Ohio. Kept the cash with the rest. $15,000, my new start. The house felt empty without her stuff, her lies. I liked it that way. She'd left the shelter note behind, creased, tear-stained. I burned it in the sink, watched the ashes curl. Next day, her office called me, said she'd quit, no warning. She's a mess, Lisa said. What happened? I shrugged, though she couldn't see. Guess she lost everything. Hung up, checked the tracker one last time. Jeremy's car pinged in a junkyard, crushed, probably. Fitting. I tossed the device in a dumpster, wiped my hands. Clara was out there, alone, broke, humiliated. Jeremy was running, ruined. I'd torn them apart, piece by piece, and they'd never know how deep I'd planned it. The warehouse gave me overtime, good timing. I worked until my hands bled, stacking crates, hauling loads, letting the ache drown out the quiet. Clara's absence lingered, but it wasn't pain. It was relief. The house was mine now, bare and clean. I sold what I didn't need, her old furniture, kitchen stuff, anything with her fingerprints. Kept the cash, added it to the pile. $16,000 total. Not a fortune, but enough to start over. I didn't miss her. Didn't miss us. I missed who I'd been before she'd hollowed me out. Rumors trickled in. Clara at her sister's, crashing on a couch, begging for loans. Lisa texted me once. She's saying you ruined her. True. I didn't reply. Let her talk. I'd done the math, laid the traps, watched them snap shut. She'd ruined herself, chasing him, thinking I'd stay blind. Jeremy surfaced too, spotted in some border town working a bar gig, dodging creditors. The reporter ran a follow-up. Fallen lawyer flees. I framed it, hung it where the noose had been. A trophy, maybe, or a reminder. I found her last lie in the attic. A box of letters, hidden under old blankets. Jeremy's handwriting. Sappy promises. We'll leave, start fresh. Just us. Dated months back before I'd caught on. She'd planned it all, step by step, while I'd fixed her coffee, mowed the lawn, played the fool. I burned them too, let the smoke sting my eyes. Didn't cry, just coughed, laughed, moved on. She'd wanted a new life? She got one, penniless, shamed, alone. I'd made sure of it. The shelter sent another note. More thanks. More praise for Clara's gifts. I mailed it to her sister's address, added the diner photo again. Let her see it one last time, let it twist the knife. I pictured her opening it, hands shaking, sister hovering, asking questions. No answers left, just the wreckage I'd built. I sold the truck next, bought a beat-up van, packed what mattered. Clothes, tools, cash. The landlord took the keys, didn't ask why I was leaving. I didn't explain. I drove north that night, no plan, just rode. The radio played some old song she'd loved. Ironic, but I didn't change it. Let it hum, let it fade. Clara was out there, scrambling, and Jeremy was pouring cheap drinks for drunks. I dismantled them, slow and cold, without raising my voice. They'd never see me coming because I was already gone. The van rattled. The cash sat heavy in my bag, and the horizon stretched wide. I was free, not happy, not yet, but free. Weeks later, I stopped in a small town. Pine trees, dirt roads, no one who'd know my name. Rented a cabin, cheap, with a view of nothing but sky. The cash held me over. $15,000 after the van. Enough to breathe while I figured things out. Worked odd jobs. Fixing roofs, hauling wood. Anything that kept my hands busy. Locals nodded, didn't pry. I liked that. The warehouse was a memory. The house a ghost. Clara and Jeremy were shadows, fading fast. I didn't check on them, didn't need to. I'd done enough. One night, a barstool philosopher asked if I'd ever been married. I sipped my beer, nodded. Once. He grinned, waiting for more. I didn't give it. Just paid my tab, walked out. The air was cold, sharp, clean in a way the city never was. I thought about her then, first time in a while. Wondered if she'd found a job, a place, some shred of pride. Doubted it. She'd built her life on quicksand, and I'd kicked it out from under her. Jeremy too, pouring shots in some nowhere dive, probably cursing her name. I hoped they blamed each other. Hoped it stung. The cabin had a porch, rickety but mine. I sat there mornings, coffee in hand, watching mist roll off the hills. Found an old radio, fixed it up, let it crackle through static and songs. Life was small now, quiet, slow, deliberate. No more chasing, no more pretending. I'd torn down their world and walked away, hands clean, conscience clear. Well, mostly. Some nights, I'd see her face, smiling before the lies, and feel a twinge. Not regret, just something past. Mail came once a week, mostly junk. One envelope stood out, no return address, postmarked from her sister's town. Inside, A single line in her handwriting. I'm sorry. No signature, just that. I stared at it, let it sink in. Sorry didn't fix it. Didn't bring back the years, the trust, the me I'd lost. I tore it up, scattered the pieces in the wind. She didn't get absolution. She got consequences. Months later, I heard she'd moved. Somewhere cheap, working retail, barely scraping by. Jeremy vanished off the grid, probably broke. I didn't care enough to dig. The van was paid off, the cabin mine for another season. I'd started carving wood, crude shapes, nothing fancy, but it filled the hours. The cash dwindled, but I'd manage. I always had. Clara and Jeremy were footnotes now. A story I'd tell myself when the nights got long. I'd won. Not loud, not fast, but thoroughly, completely. And that was enough.